Okay, I'd like to call to order the regularly scheduled Planning Commission meeting for May 9th, 2013. I'd like the record to show that all commissioners are present with the exception of Commissioner Zechmeister. And then I would like to ask Commissioner Brower to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Great, thank you, Charles. Okay, this brings us to the public comments portion of the meeting. This is an opportunity for anyone in the audience that would like to address the Planning Commission on an item that is not on the agenda. Now would be the time to do so. And we do have one request to speak from Mr. Gardner. I'd like to approach the podium, repeat your name for us and your city of residence, even though we know what it is.
Good evening, Chairman Hughes, council members, staff. My name is Jim Gardner. I live in Lake Forest. Actually, I live on Lake One, and I'm on the board of directors there. And on behalf of the board, I wanted to remind you that this Saturday we're having our annual Garden Club plant sale. It's from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m., 8:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. It's a great place. The bargains are outstanding, and a lot of people use that as, I forgot Mother's Day, which is the Sunday, so that's a perfect place to get flowers. And they're busy arranging the flowers tomorrow night, so everything is really fresh. So first thing I wanted to do was to invite you all to that. Number two, I forgot that there's no coffee and cookies here. What the hell does that happen? What's going on with that? Do I have to go to Dunnick for this? I'm thinking of the public. I don't mind the commission gets the, I'm going to talk to somebody. So I didn't get coffee. I was looking forward to my coffee and my cookie. Hey, what happened with that? The other thing I wanted to mention was, I'm not sure if you've noticed, but at the council for years, and I'm going to say this in the nicest way possible without meaning it in a bad way, but the council has generally been reactive in the sense that the staff put something on their plate and then they talk about the plate. It's this, it's that, et cetera, et cetera. And if you notice in the last couple of months, they've been much more proactive. They've been giving the staff assignments and saying, we'd like you to look into this, we'd like you to look into that, we'd like you to look into that, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's going to be a big payoff down the road for the city. So I'm coming here, and I'll be coming to the Parks Commission too, and trying to urge everybody, and I do this at the council, to get on that proactive, there's lots of stuff that the staff they're already busy, they might not think of it, so if we can think them up, we meaning you, but we the citizens as well, I think that's a really good approach. So I'd like you to consider that going forward. Anyway, thank you very much.
Mr. Gardner, we'd like to... Oh, sure. Go ahead, Andrew. Sure.
So do you have any items that you'd like, that you think that we should be proactive on?
Oh, I'm like a harpy. I'm tired myself with the traffic commission and the traffic. I mean, that's my number one issue that clearly falls under here. And my worry with that is we're about to spend, everybody knows the traffic's awful. So we're about to spend about $15 million or something like that in the next couple of years on the traffic mitigation. In the back of my mind, I'm a little bit fearful that the people who put us in the position we're in are the people who will be handling that money. So I personally, and I know there are other people who share that point of view, my highest priority would be that get a little new blood in there, not to throw out everything that's been done, but take a new look at that area. I got the red light. That would be my number one. I've got 10 more, but that would be my number one issue for you.
Thank you, Mr. Gardner.
Thanks for having me.
And we're happy to see you here this evening, and I know you have a big following. Encourage your followers to attend the meeting and give us their input. This is really important stuff for us. We need to understand what the thoughts and the ideas, the feelings of the community are. So it's important that you're here, so we thank you for coming.
No, I will. I put put an article in the Patch today, as a matter of fact, asking people to come and talk about the parking issue. So I've been in the past only doing that for the council, and I'll be doing it for the commissions now too, trying to get people more involved, because this is where it happens. Yeah,
Great, thank you. Okay, this brings us to the presentation items. The first was the consent calendar. And we have 2 items on the consent calendar. Do I hear a motion on the consent calendar?
So moved, or I should say move to adopt the consent calendar.
Got a
I'll second.
Got a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Yes, I'd like to ask a question before we go forward. If I can have this back.
That's not on the consent calendar.
This is not the consent calendar item.
Correct.
Okay,
No question then?
no question.
Okay. Very good. We have a motion and a second. Call for a vote. All in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Okay, this brings us to the public hearing, and the first item, we got the revision to the ordinance 250 regulations for emergency shelters, and it looks like Cheryl, you're going to handle this for us. Let's see here. I'm sorry, this item is going to be continued. Is that right?
That's correct.
I'm sorry. Okay. We don't need a motion to continue. Let's get a motion.
If
A
I
motion?
Sorry,
Okay,
if I
got
could
a
have
motion?
one quick question.
Sure.
Just for my own clarification, my only concern is I know when this came on initially and the ordinance 250 was being adopted, there was discussion of a timeline being involved to not get in trouble with the powers that be at the state in this issue. I just want to make sure we're not dancing close to that line by continuing.
We've looked at the schedule carefully. We have the housing element preparation going on concurrently, so that you'll see these items in sequence. So we're very well aware of the schedule.
But I
Thank you, Cheryl.
had no doubt that you were. I just wanted to kind of make it official that we're good there.
Thank you.
Sir.
Do we have a motion?
I'll motion to continue this item.
Okay, second.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. This brings us to item number 4, which also we have a request to continue this item to the June 27th meeting. So do I have a motion on this item for continuance?
I'll move to continue.
Okay, we have a motion, a second.
I'll second.
Motion, a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, okay. Call for a vote. All in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Okay, we're just breezing along here. Now, if we can handle this next one as quickly as the last two, we're going to shatter the record, but unfortunately I don't have any expectation for that. Ron, it looks like you are going to be the presenter for us this evening on this item. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, and good evening, Chairman Hughes and members of the Planning Commission. This evening, we have a discussion item concerning amendments to the non-residential use provisions of the city's parking code. Specifically, staff has identified various sections of Chapter 9.168 of the Municipal Code, which, based on past parking code discussions with the Commission and analysis by staff, warrant reevaluation. Staff is seeking guidance from the Commission with respect to advancing code amendments in these areas for consideration by the Commission and City Council at future public hearings. The staff report for this item identifies what may be considered deficiencies in the current code with respect to certain standards, including parking standards based on land use, standards for drive-through uses, provisions for long-term or compact parking, standards for disabled accessible parking, and provisions for parking of alternative forms of transportation. What I'd like to do is briefly address the standards highlighted for discussion in the staff report one at a time, and pause between each for questions or input from the Commission along the way. Alternatively, if the Commission prefers, I could just power through the presentation and turn it over to the Commission at the conclusion. As a reminder, there is a summary table that's on page 7 of your staff reports, which lists each of the topic items discussed in the staff report. The Commission may find it helpful to refer to this table as sort of a checklist during the discussion. So the first item relates to parking requirements based on land use. As you are aware, the city recently adopted a new land use matrix for non-commercial uses that is significantly more comprehensive than the list of uses currently in the parking code. The effect of this is that many uses listed in the land use matrix are not explicitly assigned a parking requirement. To remedy this, the city could amend the code such that the list of uses in the land use matrix is duplicated in the parking code and a parking standard is assigned to each use. To accomplish this, staff would survey other cities in the region, review various parking-related publications, and conduct other research in order to arrive at a recommended standard for each use. Staff is seeking input from the Commission on this approach versus maintaining the code as it is and relying on a case-by-case determination for those uses listed in the land use matrix that do not already have a corresponding parking requirement specified. With respect to drive-through uses, currently the code does not provide standards for the design of drive-through lanes for drive-through businesses. Instead, the city currently evaluates these uses on a case-by-case basis with reference to citywide design guidelines and studies submitted by the applicant. As an alternative to this approach, the current approach, the parking code could be amended to establish certain minimum standards for drive-through uses, such as a minimum queuing length within the drive-through lane, a minimum lane width, and or a minimum turning radius for any curves within the drive-through lane. If the Commission supports establishing such standards, staff would conduct further research and provide more specific recommendations for these standards, as well as any others the Commission may have in mind. In particular, staff would like feedback as to whether the Commission feels the city would be best served by including a baseline standard alone, or whether there should be provisions for flexibility. For example, the code could require that drive-through lanes provide a queuing distance for a minimum of, let's say, 5 vehicles, but also allow an applicant to petition the Commission for a reduced standard. Conversely, the code could explicitly authorize the Commission to require that a project provide more than the minimum queuing distance on a case-by-case basis as projects come before the Commission with a site development permit or use permit. Of course, these two provisions together that provide for flexibility would put us closer to where we are now, whereby we effectively have a guideline that is evaluated on a case-by-case basis. So there's pros and cons and trade-offs to each approach, and I'd be happy to elaborate on this if the Commission desires.
Yeah, I think what we'd like to do is probably have a chance to actually discuss each of these elements. So if you want to, we can do it after you run through and give us a brief on it, or we can do it, well, you're already partway through, why don't you finish, and then we'll go back and we can address them individually, each one of these elements individually.
Whatever the Commission's pleasure is, sir. Sure. With respect to long-term parking, currently the code allows up to 30% of the total number of parking stalls at a project site to be long-term, subject to approval of the Development Services Director. Long-term parking stalls are 8 foot 6 inches wide, which is 6 inches narrower than a standard stall. So effectively, what we're talking about is compact parking. The staff report identifies several options for updating this code section, including reducing the percentage of long-term parking stalls allowed, creating a 2-tiered provision for approval of long-term stalls, whereby a certain percentage is allowed by right or with director approval, and a greater percentage is allowed with commission approval. Another option is to require commission approval for any long-term stalls proposed in conjunction with a project that is subject to planning commission approval. So this would correct the current provision in the code that has the authority with the director for approval of any long-term stalls. Another option is to rename long-term parking compact parking, as it's more commonly referred to, and requiring that pavement markings be provided to identify any of the stalls in a parking lot, so drivers know when they're pulling into a compact stall. The code could also be amended to eliminate the provision restricting long-term stalls to the perimeter of a site, or to add other criteria for citing long-term stalls within a parking lot. There are, of course, many other options for regulating compact parking, and staff welcomes any ideas the Commission may have, as well as your thoughts on these specific options. Moving on to disabled accessible parking. As discussed in the staff report, the standards for disabled accessible parking contained in the city's parking code are currently obsolete. The standards were made obsolete as a result of amendments to the California Building Code, which regulates accessible parking statewide. The California Building Code supersedes any standards that the city may have, so the city has been applying the California Building Code standards in lieu of the standards for accessible parking contained in our code. The city could remedy this by either rewriting the city's standards to conform with the current CBC, or by eliminating the city's standards altogether and substituting a reference to the CBC. So that would be along the lines of a code section that says handicap parking shall be provided in accordance with the requirements of the current edition of the California Building Code. This latter approach would ensure that the city's code is always consistent with California standards. Finally, the last item that we identified in the staff report relates to alternative transportation parking. And what we're talking about here is parking standards for bicycles, motorcycles, alternative fuel vehicles, car or van pool parking, or other non-standard automobile parking. Currently, the city has no parking-related standards or provisions for any of these forms of transportation. As discussed in the staff report, California recently enacted the California Green Building Code, which includes requirements for bicycle parking that are mandated statewide. The city could allow these standards to prevail and thereby avoid the need to create new standards, or we could establish standards which exceed those in the Green Building Code. For bicycle parking, a common practice is to require the provision of bicycle racks in conjunction with new development projects and/or changes in land use. Typically, bicycle parking takes the form of a ratio, parking standards, I should say, take the form of a ratio based on the total number of automobile parking spaces provided on the site. So, for example, the code might require one parking stall for every 20 parking spaces provided in a site, or some standard based on that sort of ratio to standard parking spaces. In order to allow the Commission as much opportunity to discuss these matters in greater detail, I'll conclude my presentation here. Once we've heard from the Commission, staff will proceed with any necessary research and the drafting of appropriate code amendments. In the interim, staff will present additional reports discussing residential parking standards, and as mentioned in the report, landscape standards for parking lots. Thank you, and look forward to any comments the Commission may have.
Great, thank you. I appreciate the presentation. Do you have any questions of Ron?
I do. Just want to make sure I have clarification here, Ron, and thank you. I appreciate this. The last two items, disabled access and the parking alternative transportation, both of those, California regulation supersedes city, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So in my mind, the default is what you've already said in my mind. There's no reason for us to even have any discussion as far as what the city should do, my thinking. Thank you.
Okay. All right, let's go through and let's start. We'll go with the parking requirements by land use, and let's discuss that item, then we'll work our way down the list. And would anybody like to open it up on this particular item? Okay, seeing none, I'll open it up. You're right, we, to a certain degree, currently have our parking standard based on land use, not specifically on a matrix. The matrix may be beneficial. I think we may find that absent of any changes we make in specific areas here, whether it be long-term, disability access, whatever the case may be, probably just simply applying those current standards to the matrix, and then we can modify the individual items within that. It might be an appropriate way, and the reason I say that, because we do have things in there that affect some of the centers, and one in particular that's coming up before us shortly, where we have a drive-through facility. Those are all things for us to consider. So my thought would be to, as a starting point, would be to go ahead and apply our current standards with whatever input we have here this evening to a matrix, and then let's take a look at the matrix, and I think it's basically just a review and approval at that point, unless we see something dramatically out of line. But the way the standard stands right now, at least that gives us a starting point to apply to a matrix, and the matrix, then we can get a better view of what's going on overall in the city as far as the parking and the standards. Any other thoughts on the first item? Okay. As far as the drive-through, since I'm on a roll, I'm going to go ahead and lead off with the drive-through. It's pretty difficult for us to set a standard. I think we need to be a little more flexible on the drive-throughs. I think maybe some standard guidelines that we want to see, maybe as far as landscape screening or general concept of landscape screening. But for us to be able to tell somebody that they need a certain number of cars for queuing, it's pretty difficult to say, because the site layout is really going to dictate when more or less cars in queuing may be appropriate. If you get something that's close to an entrance, you're going to want a longer queuing, I would think. If you get something that's an open parking lot, the queuing's not going to be that critical. So I think flexibility is probably something that we want to be able to build into this particular item. I don't think we want to discourage a good, viable business from coming into our community based on some overly restrictive conditions, but at the same time we want to be prepared to not create a situation within any particular center that's then going to impact other businesses within the center. And that's the primary purpose of the non-residential application, is to make sure that we can create an environment wherein the businesses in that center or those areas can thrive and not be strangled by the traffic and the parking. So that being the basic concept of this, I almost think that we need to look at parking for the drive-through on an individual basis, or at least the queuing and probably that sort of thing. My opinion is that we want to, as a general rule, be able to create some screening between traffic, Main Street traffic, or on-street traffic, and on-site queuing and parking. Okay, I'm sorry, jumped in there. Anybody else like to jump in on this item? Charles.
Okay. Thank you. Actually, for the most part, I agree wholeheartedly, especially on the issue of the drive-through facilities. I just, at the last meeting when we were considering, building number 8 and their issues, anything that was too restrictive would have really just made it, rather than being able to say to that particular project development team and that owner, let's get together, let's work, let's get, sit down with staff and come up with something that works, we'd be saying no. End of story, and that would have been it. And we lose a potentially viable, thriving business that hires people and employs our local residents and provides services to local residents, and just none of that sounds good to me. And also, just having the background in restaurants like I do, if you have an In-N-Out with the drive-through versus a Burger King with the drive-through, one of them's going to have much longer queuing needs than the other. And to be able to say, you know, In-N-Out, your queue is sufficient because it's the same size as Burger King's, would probably be very short-sighted for us because In-N-Out always has a crazy line, whereas Burger King does not. Just an example. Or a bank with a drive-up teller probably doesn't need as much queuing as a restaurant does. And so I think it makes a lot more sense to require the queuing studies like we do and let the applicant come to us and say, here's our study, here's what the professionals have shown us, here's why what we're doing is right, and, you know, we'll give them the burden to prove it and show it to us and sell us on it, but at the same time, we give them the flexibility to figure out what works.
Thank you, Charles. Andrew, you're up.
So, I guess I have some just general philosophical, like, items I just want to. I know you're not asking me about philosophy in general, but you know, I want to go back to, and this is not going to take very long, so just bear with me. You know, the Declaration of Independence. You know, it talks about the life and liberty and pursuit of happiness, and to me that really talks about freedom. And you know, I think government allows people to manage, and businesses to manage their own affairs. I know sometimes, like, human nature can take advantage of those things. I mean, hence we have a police department. I'm getting to parking. You know, I think parking congestion is kind of one of these self-balancing, or can be a self-balancing. You know, and is it worth the wait? Kind of like CJ said, In-N-Out, I'm willing to wait longer at In-N-Out in the drive-through lane. But you know, if there's 3 cars in a Burger King line, you know, I'm probably not going to go because of the, you know, it's just a self-balancing type of situation. So sometimes that congestion can be self-balancing. So I think in general I agree with having standards along all these lines, and specifically on this one, I think I agree. I think there's not really, both commissioners eloquently stated that you know, one size doesn't fit all. So that's kind of how I'm looking at. And the same thing for the first item. I really didn't have anything to say on that one. So I just think, you know, having people having that freedom. If there's a lot, if I've been in centers where it's just wall-to-wall parking, and you know what, I don't really go to those. And I know we need to have standards, but I just think that, you know, if a business really wants to entice people to come, they're going to build the parking. I know not everyone follows that, but I'm just saying in general that. So that's just kind of some philosophical things I have. Yes, I'm done.
Thank you, Andrew. Would you have anything to add to that? You know, just to contribute to what you were saying, Andrew, what we have to keep in focus here is these are development standards. These are not standards that we apply after the development is complete. And once a tenant is in there, they have lost control over what is going on with parking. The idea is to create an environment that allows our tenants to thrive and be a contributing factor to our community. Good example would be, we have a center at Lake Forest and Muirlands, and when it was fully occupied and we had a number of restaurants in there, City Hall used to be down by there, and used to hear from staff that they would go over to the different restaurants. One of the problems that you had was at the peak hours, and that's what you have to plan for, is that you'd have to drive around and wait for a parking space. You couldn't get parking. That does not benefit the tenants. That is a situation where the landlord benefited by the developer, probably different from the landlord, but the developer benefited because he was able to get maximum square footage on the site, minimum parking, and then he walked away, and the tenants, future landlord, and the city all became bearers of the burden that were imparted on us by the developer. And so what we're trying to do here is create a set of guidelines wherein we don't wind up bearing the burden for what a developer places on us. We as a city, we as individual business operators, we would then in fact have a viable project that would be vibrant, that would be prosperous, and that all the tenants have an equal opportunity to succeed. We can't make them succeed, but we want to be able to afford everybody an opportunity to succeed. So what we're trying to do here is establish a set of guidelines that allows us to create an environment that gives those people that opportunity. Okay, so we're not trying to be restrictive. In fact, we are trying to help businesses succeed. And an integral part of business success is being able to get the customer in and being able to get the customer out. It doesn't matter whether you're a drive-through bank, a sit-down coffee shop, fast food restaurant, pick the name that you want. They all have the same basic needs when it comes to traffic. And so what we're trying to achieve is the optimal. Whether we can achieve that on each individual site or not, that's a different story. But we don't want to burden the site going in with less than what would be reasonable to expect. So that's really, as I view it anyway, and you're welcome to jump in and give me a counterpoint on this, but I view that that's really what we're trying to do here this evening. We're trying to create a set of guidelines that are not restrictive, but in fact are an opportunity for each of the businesses that would be a part of that particular location to have an equal opportunity to succeed. So that's my point on this. Jerry, it looks like you have something to say.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Hughes. I was thinking that there's pros and cons both ways. If we were to set a minimum standard by which drive aisles should be, that could help in staff and in the applicant knowing up front what they're looking at. And if those standards might be deemed to be too restrictive, they certainly could come in and get a variance from the commission. But I also appreciate, Chairman, your comments about individual sites are laid out differently. And so, we're walking a line here right now where I think we've done a good job in the past of taking an individual application, applying it to that site, making the requirements to make that work, which is best for the community at large, not necessarily the developer, but the community at large, and that's our responsibility. So I can see both sides of this, and I'm not 100% convinced that we couldn't do a minimum set of standards here so that an applicant could see what they were looking at, minimally speaking, and staff then could work with the applicant on those kind of things and then bring it back, and we can make those adjustments. So, I mean, I think we just need to make sure that we're all in agreement with whatever we come up with. That's all.
Thank you, Jerry. Charles, looked like you wanted to jump in there.
Thank you. I'm actually Chairman Verplank, Commissioner Verplank. Sorry, Tim. I was kind of dancing that line in my own head a little bit. I'm not necessarily opposed to. I think I agree to a certain extent with the idea of setting a base standard, although where that gets difficult in my mind is in order to leave the flexibility that I think we need, not just desire. I think we would have to go through the extra step, and if it means extra work for us, so be it. But if we're going to do it, we got to do it right. And that's the extra step that I see is breaking it down to say, we need to see X number of car lengths for basically tying it to anticipated traffic counts. So in other words, if it's a bank drive-through and they know that historically when we open up bank drive-throughs as Chase Bank, for example, we're going to have so many cars per day that come through here, or during those peak times, this is what we expect. Because they're making those calculations anyway. If they're spending the kind of money to build out a project, they're making those predictions, and they're making that or at least I would hope they are. And so, if we can find some way to tie it to that gives us the ability to say, okay, you made your predictions, and you supported why they're viable and why they're right, and based on that, then yeah, you need a minimum of this. Then I think that gives us a little bit, so, for what it's worth.
Charles, I'll just jump in here again real quick, if you don't mind. Were you going to jump? Let me just play off this point. And you make a very valid point. One of the things that we hear frequently from applicants to the planning department is that, and one of the reasons that we are business friendly here is that we do have a set of standards. And so when people come in to make an application, they have a reasonable understanding of what's going to be required of them. We've heard that from many, many applicants. So your point is very valid, and you brought up something that I hadn't considered, and that is that oftentimes your applicant's going to come in with an idea of what he needs. We just then need to apply that to the site specific, and that's where staff's review and our review of the project would come into play. But I think I would agree with your statements as a whole. Andrew, are you going to jump in again?
Yeah, I was just going to reply to your comments and, with a smile, say this is not my first rodeo. I agree with everything you said. Well aware that these are standards. And that's my last comment when I think I said, I agree with having standards and, providing flexibility. But I think we just realize that there are market forces that have incentive to people. Businesses want people to have an enjoyable experience. So, and I said generally there are exceptions, and that's why, if we lived in a perfect world, we would have ample parking in every place. We wouldn't have to have standards, and I agree that we have standards. It's the people who take advantage of it. But generally, there are market forces in effect that want people to have an enjoyable experience, whether they're building a house, whether they're visiting a restaurant, living in their house. So I just was trying to say that I think it's definitely important to have standards, but allowing some discussion for market forces, freedom and liberty, and so that was just my 2 cents.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. You want any change back? Okay, so I think what we're saying here, it sounds like there is a general agreement on this item that we want to set some general guidelines, but we need to maintain some flexibility so that we can address site-specific conditions. Would that be a fair statement, kind of a generalization where we're at here? So based on that, if you want to work on something, Ron, although I think that's really where we're at already on drive-throughs in essence, other than we don't have any landscape guidelines per se. And I do understand we're going to be addressing landscaping in a different module at a later date, so maybe that would be the appropriate time to bring that back to us and address it specific then to drive-throughs also, so we can have some discussion. We're going to be talking about parking lot landscaping as a general item, and you might want to make that as a specific item within that discussion for us. Any other discussions on drive-through? It's been pretty easy so far. You guys are easy. This brings us to the next item, and that's the long-term parking. And if I could just interject here just a little bit, Ron, a little historical data on long-term parking. When the long-term parking concept was originally implemented, the idea was that long-term parking was actually going to be used by employees of the facilities that occupied that property. Clearly, that has not been the case. They are made up of the same human nature that we all are, and they take the spots that's closest or most convenient or most desirable for whatever the particular reasons are, and I don't think there's any consideration given or any direction by the property owners or business owners to, in fact, use the long-term parking, which is what the original intention for that was. And therein lies the reason that those parking spaces were put out around the perimeter so that we could make those spaces more appealing to the or make the closer-in spaces more available to the customer as opposed to the employees. So that's really where the long-term concept originally came from, as we discussed it, I don't know, help me, Gil, 15 years ago, whatever it was now. So with that being said, I will turn it over to anybody here that would like to make a comment. Andrew, you're up.
Yes, so this is one I have a strong opinion of. When I was on the Planning Commission in Tustin, we had, compact spaces. And I wanted to give my just general philosophy, because I think this is an area where I think, planning departments, planning commissions think that they have this great idea on compact spots. And the problem is that, again, people don't follow that, and I've been studying compact spots since I've been on the since I was on the Planning Commission in Tustin, and I have never, ever, ever seen them work. I have always seen that there's a huge SUV that takes up 2 spots, and then there's another large vehicle that's in the compact. I have never seen compact cars only park in compact spots. So I think this is a bureaucratic nightmare that has been run amok. I don't think we need compact spots in the city, and I actually have done almost every single time I've gone into a parking lot with compact spots, I've studied and said if they actually had regular space spots, they would actually increase the effective parking of that parking lot. So, yeah, so I think that, if we want to really effectively change and increase the effective parking of a parking lot, that we should allow some kind of credit to those who decide not to have compact spots, and make incentive, provide some kind of incentive for people to use these market forces that that people do not use that correctly, do not use these compact spots correctly. So in essence, so say if there was a 10% requirement, or a requirement for, say, 300 spots in an area, in a parking lot, and so what would that be? Let's just say it was 330. So they said, we'll put 10% is compact, so we'll have 330 spots. Somehow, if you made it so that they could have less spots, but with an equal size, a standard size, so that maybe they'd be only required to put in 310 instead of 330, because 10% with 30 would be in a compact situation, or maybe it would be 15. So 315, they would have some credit to not have to have compact spots. So that's my story, and I'm sticking with it.
Great, thank you, Andrew. Any other comments? Charles?
The only real input I have on this one at the moment is that I am a big fan of changing the terminology to compact spots at a minimum. If we're going to have them, let's call them what they are. So, I read through this report, and then I had to go back and go, okay, wait a minute, what exactly was a long-term? The definition's in here, but it didn't make sense to the name, and so I had to reread it to catch, okay, now I got it. Now my head's around this particular topic, and just a pet peeve. Call it what it is. So.
Thank you, Charles. Sure.
I'm going to pretty much agree with what Commissioner Hamilton just talked of. I will avoid a compact spot. I will drive around and find another spot. I will not park in them. They're a waste of space, in my opinion. So I concur with what you said, Andrew, that we need to find a way to, I think, get around that. I'm not sure credits or whatever it is, but I'm not in favor of compact spots at all. But that doesn't mean that we don't address the long-term aspects. So we do have 2 separate items here in terms of that. And we need to find a way with our applicants to get them, have enough of an incentive for them to manage their own employees so that we have those spaces available for the shoppers in there. And we talked about this when we, last time we met, and we're going to talk about it some more. We've got some work to do. It would not bother me if we took compact spaces out of the vernacular altogether.
Thank you, Jerry. Let me jump in here because I've got a couple thoughts on this as well. And I would agree. I drive a larger car. I don't fit into compact spaces. I don't like door. I can get in, but I don't want the door dings that seem to follow them. I like to take care of my car. It's 5 years old, and I hope to have it for another 5 years. But our original concept of long-term parking was a nice idea, but it didn't execute well. And to see the compact title go away, or at least be reduced, and part of the reason that the compact space was brought in was to effectively give what you're talking about, and that is effectively give the developer an avenue for getting more spaces and less real estate. I can't tell you percentage-wise how many are double parked. That I've never done a study on. But I think that it really is kind of a basic misconception. I've spent the last couple of days looking at parking codes and parking studies for probably a dozen different cities around the country: San Francisco, San Diego, Fulton, a whole bunch of them. And what I find is that it really depends on the character of the city and what the business looks like and what the general attitude is as to what their guidelines are on parking. You look at San Francisco, they prefer not to have any parking. I mean, they want everybody to ride a bicycle, basically. That's an overstatement. But I mean, that's kind of the general tone of their parking study. You go back to Alexandria, Virginia, and all they have is big parking spaces and open fields and that sort of thing. So, you have to look at the environments you're dealing with, and we're dealing with Lake Forest, and we're dealing with a fairly limited number of future properties within Lake Forest, and even redevelopments of those. Probably overloading on compact spaces is not realistic for our particular community. That's my opinion on it, based on just the different studies. While I'm talking about that, interesting study, Ron or Cheryl, maybe one of you might be able to get some more information on it. Katz was the engineering firm that was working on San Diego's study, and it looked like they had some material that was along the same lines as what we're talking about here, but the report that I could find wasn't actually the final report with all the conclusions in it. They had some general observations leading up to it. If you could, I think Katz has made presentations to us before. If you might want to try and contact them and maybe get some information on their work that they were doing for the city of San Diego. It actually looks like some of that might be pertinent to what we're doing. It's not only was it addressing commercial, but it was also addressing residential. And the reason I got into it is because I was looking for tandem parking specifically. So wound up leading me in a lot of different trails, but they had some issues. They'd addressed issues in San Diego for both of those items. So it sounds like we kind of have a consensus here that compact parking may not necessarily be the ideal thing. I know in what we're talking about here, we're talking about redefining the terminology, which is fine. I don't think there's a problem, at least from what I'm hearing from my fellow commissioners. There doesn't seem to be a problem in redefining the terminology between long-term and compact. I think there seems to be a bigger issue with the basic concept of the application of the parking spaces and the sizes to the project. So maybe that's something we can come back and talk about. But here again, that really is going to be addressed in the matrix that you provide for us up in the first section. So maybe that'll be the answer to it. So I guess on this particular item, it sounds like if we have an agreement, we can go ahead, Andrew.
And I just want to add, if a business would want to, I don't know the reason why, but if a business would want to have their whole parking lot as compact, I don't see any problem with that. they probably won't get many customers. So, again, just allowing someone who doesn't want to have, it's the business choice, I think, is what I'm trying to get at here, is allow them the freedom to pick if they want to go full size for the whole lot. Well, let's just give them some credit on spaces as if they were going to a compact situation, is my humble opinion, and allow them the flexibility so that I don't know if there would be some business that would cater to all smart cars, like smart car washing, washing in every spot they decide to have is compact. Well, that's up to them. So that's my additional 2 cents.
Thank you, Andrew. So since you put in 2 cents on, it's worth another penny. The flaw that I see in just saying, well, take your pick, it's going to be full size, or do what you want to do, there are two. Number one, in most cases, it's not actually the person who's running the business on the site that is the one that does the initial permitting and the design and the layout for the project. In the case of some of the industrial projects, that may be true. But then again, you also have the individual who is going to do that for the purpose of meeting the parking requirements at the expense of whoever is going to be the ultimate tenant in the property. So to say that I'm not willing to throw out parking regulations and parking standards and just tell the developer to put in whatever he wants to put in. So we have a disagreement up here on that. I am categorically not willing to go along with it. If the rest of you are, then so be it. That's the decision of the Planning Commission. But from my personal perspective, I can't support that. Lisa, you want to respond again? Go ahead.
No, I'm not saying to get rid of the standards. Again, I think it's good to have standards and it's good to provide flexibility. But when it comes to a business and they want to, like I said, if they want to have all compact spots, I don't think that's a wise choice, but that would be their decision. Or if they want to have all full-size spots, I think it's important, but it's
Go ahead, Ron.
based on the space requirements that the business may have.
Okay. Go ahead, Ron.
Thank you, Chairman Hughes. What I was going to suggest, what would be helpful for staff, even going back to the first item, is if the Commission could perhaps take sort of a straw vote on each of the items that are up for discussion, so staff can be clear on where the Commission stands on these items. So, for example, with respect to compact parking, I'm hearing from most of the Commission that you don't like compact parking, and so I'm thinking that the staff approach would be to eliminate the provision for compact parking, but then we're kind of going back and forth. So any effort to clarify the consensus of the Commission would really be appreciated.
Okay, good point, Ron. Well, let's go back up to the first item, and that has really to do with the matrix that we talked about.
Excuse
for
me,
the-
Chairman, before we
Sure,
go there, we do have a speaker card, so before the Commission really takes some straw votes, it could be most appropriate to hear from any
You're right.
public that we have.
Very good, Gail. Thank you. We do have a request to speak. I don't know if I've ever met this gentleman before. Is there a Jim Gardner in the audience? You're welcome to contribute if you'd like. Okay, you missed your opportunity. Thank you. No, I'm just kidding. It's purely your call, Mr. Gardner. Once again, for the record, name and city residence.
Jim Gardner, Lake Forest. On what you've said so far, I'm in total agreement. What hasn't been discussed so far, the electrical charging, that's great. I think that's a great idea. The bicycle and the disabled, again, that just makes a lot of sense. That's a great idea. Oh, by the way, Burger King is you mentioned Burger King. Burger King, I did some studies in my other life on fast food. Burger King is the #1 pumper through the lines. They can get people through in less than 2 minutes. Some people take more than 3 minutes to get through the lines. But Burger King is the #1. Yeah, on the motorcycles, the only unusual comment I may have is, as a former motorcycle owner and driver, is that it's nice to have a full stall to put your motorcycle in, because some clown is always opening the door and you come back and your motorcycle's on the ground. So in those where they give you those little tiny things, it really puts you at risk for big cars with big doors that knock over your bike. So everything else, I think, I don't have anything else to add. When you have nothing to say, you should say nothing. With motorcycles, I like a full stall.
Thank you, Jim. Mr. Gardner. Okay, let's bring it back up to the commission once again. Let's start with the parking requirements by land use. Do we have a consensus to bring that back in the form of a matrix so we can look at individual land uses, parking requirements for individual land uses? Yep. What do you think?
Yeah, just to clarify my position very quickly on that, I think, to make sure I'm understanding what we're consensusing on, we're talking about, I think it's a great idea to get, since they've already got the matrix of land uses, to, it just makes for a cleaner record for everybody, like we talked about, that the developers and the applicants like to know what to expect. I think the cleaner we make the code, the easier that is. So.
Great. Thanks, Charles. Good comments. Okay. I think we have consensus on that one. Okay. Let's go on to the drive-through facilities. And what I gathered, and here again, let's jump in if you have anything else you want to contribute on, but I think our general feeling is that we want to have a basic standard that would be subject to review based on the individual project. And as far as what that standard is, that is probably what we need to have a little more discussion on, but I think we just need to understand that we do have we want to incorporate some flexibility so we can look at the individual project that's going in and make a final determination based on the specific requirements, specific conditions of the site. This is one of those that's just difficult to have a general blanket statement as to what's acceptable and wasn't. I think we want to be able to create the general guideline, including screening, which we'll get to when we get to the landscape module. But is that, in essence, where we're going with that? Is that clear enough for you, Ron? Do you understand where we're going with that? Glad you did. I wasn't clear on that one. Long-term parking. It sounds like the consensus is that changing the verbiage from long-term to compact is okay, but we're not really crazy about compact in the first place. So, and we can have further discussion on what impact that may have on a particular project. Also, I think it's important to understand at this point that we're really talking about projects that would come before us for a significant modification or new construction. This is existing facilities basically are grandfathered in, so we can't really come back and tell somebody who's got compact spaces now they can't have compact spaces, just so everybody is aware of that. Okay.
If I could briefly, I have a question on this before we move on to a different section. A question for Andrew, Commissioner Hamilton. I just want to make sure. I agree completely, first of all, that I think long-term market forces and general economic principles will correct a lot of these things for us if there's the flexibility in place to do so. I'll give you two examples. Hunter Court, I think it's called. It's not a parking issue per se, but it involves their parking lot, as I learned with a meeting with Mr. Belmer from the staff. But that whole issue that I raised at the last meeting, people wondering why we cut off the left turn access from Rockfield. Without getting into the history of how that happened, I mean, that landowner has essentially isolated himself by being unwilling to address this issue, and there's going to be a market payment for that. He's going to suffer because his tenants will suffer, they'll move out, and then he's not making any money on his property anymore. And so eventually I think that will correct itself. He'll either figure that out or he'll sell because he can't afford to keep it. And but that said, I do think if I'm understanding your comments about, let them do all compact if they want, or all, am I understanding correctly that you're saying basically we would still have a standard that says you need to have X number of parking spots, but if you want all compact, it's this number, and if you want all no compact, we'll give you a benefit, and it's this lower number. So it's not saying throw out the standard, it's saying, almost give them choices. Is that my understanding?
Yeah, that's a good way to say it.
It's like a menu, so to speak.
I'm not a fan of compact spots, but in the same time, I don't think it's my opinion that we just ban them outright. So if an applicant had some flexibility and wanted to, again, with, say, like there was a 50-spot requirement, if they wanted to go all compact, they could do, I can't think of the exact scenario, but you see what I'm saying is that that we're not banning them. There's still going to be a standard for parking for each area. But if they decide to do option A and have a few more compact spots because maybe their customers are all smart cars, great. If they decide to go all large spots, then that's a choice that they have too, and maybe they get some credit because if it's a normal clientele, that we know that the compact spots will be taken advantage of by large SUVs and things like that. It's not to just force something down a one size fits all, forcing it down somebody's throat.
I appreciate that. I just wanted to make sure that I was understanding that you weren't proposing to throw out standards, but more so give a more flexible standard. So.
Yeah, and we need to understand that your comment was to let market forces dictate, and we're in the planning stage. We're not in the operational stage. Okay, we're planners, and to not plan is to not succeed. You got to be real clear on this. If we go in and we don't have any standards for these people to develop to, they're going to come in with whatever they want, and then when market forces dictate that some businesses are going to fail, that's all we're doing is planning to fail, and that's not what we're supposed to do as a planning commission. Okay, failure is not a plan. So we need to have structures, we need to have guidelines, we need to be able to give direction. We have studies, we have all the data available to us. We just need to put it together. We have all the data available to us that tells us what is typically required for a successful project, whether it's commercial, whether it's industrial, whether it's residential. And so we need to be able to apply those standards, but to just let a developer come in and say, well, I think this is what it's going to be, so this is what I'm going to suggest, and we get all compact, and then our properties fail long term, that's not planning. So personally, and I'm going to go back, I'm only speaking for myself, I'm not going to take a position that is going to allow somebody to come in and give us what they want without regard for some standards that we think are necessary for prudent development, prudent facilities within our community, successful facilities, successful projects, whether it be commercial, industrial, whatever it is. Our responsibility is to act responsible. Our responsibility is to represent the best interest of the community as a whole, and that's the position I'm going to take. And if that means that I'm the only one that's going to say that I'm not going to let somebody come in and put whatever parking spaces in here they want, then that's the way it's going to be. But that's my position, and I feel like I have to say that I'm adamant about it. You said we're going to be open-minded. I'm absolutely open-minded. If somebody wants to come in with another position and they're going to tell me that all their employees are going to drive smart cars, so they're going to have all small parking spaces, that's fine. They're certainly entitled to come in and apply for a variance, and we can do that. And then we can condition it. When it turns out that they're all driving Tahoes, then we can come back and we can force them to restripe and come in compliance based on the Tahoes instead of the smart cars. But for us just to say that we're going to turn over the planning to somebody who has a vested interest to pay out their own pocketbook, as a planning commissioner, I'm not going to do that. And if that's what we're saying we need to do, then we don't need a planning commission. And it's really simple, guys. That's my opinion. Am I getting a little excited about it? Yes, I am. Thank you. Anybody else have a comment?
Well, let me just address what you're
Sure.
saying. I'm actually agreeing with both what you and Commissioner Brower are saying. And I'll say it for the fourth time, I think. I agree with having standards, but I think there should be some flexibility. If a shop has a smart car wash, detailing, I would allow them to have all smart. I think it's important that we have a standard, but I would allow the flexibility to allow them to have all compact spots. Now, if it's an SUV detailing company or business that's going to operate, are we going to allow all smart car spots for that? The compact spots? No. I think it's important to have the standard. I agree with everything you're saying. We don't need to abolish the Planning Commission, but I'm just saying that one size is not going to fit all.
Okay, very good. And that is where the variance comes in. We have standards, and just so we understand the process, okay, because I think there's a misunderstanding what the process is here. Somebody can come before us and make an application to do whatever they want to do. Okay, there's nothing that says that I can't come in and tell you that I want to put a helicopter pad in my backyard. FAA won't go along with that, but just as an exaggerated example, I can apply for a variance to do anything I want to do. Whether I succeed on it or not, whether I can justify it, and there's the key, whether I can justify it, that's a different issue. But at least we have an opportunity to review. They have an opportunity to make whatever suggestion they like to make. We're not telling somebody they have to do it. We're telling them that if they want to do something different, they have to justify why they want to do something different. And it's all about making the right decisions. We're talking about making the right decisions here, and it's based on evidence. Okay, so if somebody wants to come in, make an application for something else, we're not telling them as a commission and as a city, we're not telling them they can't do it. Do we not have a variance process in place, Ron? Or Gail, I guess, or actually, Mal, you'd be the correct one to address this. Maybe you can give clarification and guidance here.
Yeah, variances are certainly available under our code, but pursuant to state code, they're only available under certain circumstances. When a lot's shape, topography, etc., are such that the lot cannot comply reasonably with the existing standards. So with parking, I think we would be hard-pressed to ever grant a variance for a typical parking lot. If there was some kind of anomaly with the parking lot, then a variance could be granted. But to get at what we're discussing here, a variance would not be available. So if Commissioner Hamilton's approach were to work, it wouldn't be through the variance process. It'd be through alternative standards.
So it would still be available, is what you just said, through alternative standards.
If the commission were to adopt alternative standards, then there could be alternative standards available. But a variance likely would not be a means to getting access to alternative standards not otherwise adopted in the code.
Super. Thank you very much. Okay. So this brings us back to long-term parking, and I think there are some other considerations that we're going to have to take a look at, Ron. We've got concerns about if somebody comes before us and has a different need, then we want to take a look at, and I'm asking for a consensus here, okay? I think what we're saying is that we want to have an opportunity to take a look at alternative standards based on circumstances and evidence that would support some sort of a variation or deviation from the standard. Wouldn't that be acceptable, Mel? I guess that's the answer. Answer must be yes.
So let me
go ahead.
So let me ask Mal a question. So say an applicant had, we with the staff determined there was an applicant required 50 parking spaces. We could develop standard A saying you could choose between, compact and regular spots to meet that standard of 50. That's probably the current standard. But could we then set a second standard saying, alternatively, if you use full parking spots, we can take a 10% reduction and only require 45 full spots. That's kind of where I'm.
Yeah,
Is that a possibility, or is that just not?
if the commission chose to do that as part of the code revision, you could certainly do that. In the absence of permission in the code to grant a 10% reduction, you simply couldn't grant it willy-nilly. But the commission could certainly choose to do that in this code revision.
Okay, so that's generally where I'm going.
Okay, great. Your mic's still on. Here's another consideration, then, because all we're dealing with is just some anecdotal information, scenarios here. I'm sorry. Hypothetical situations here. And, to say that 10% is appropriate or 5% is appropriate or 2% is appropriate, we don't know. If staff can come back and show us that there is a 2% overlap in compact spaces, and that's, we have a inefficiency of 2% or 5%, whatever that number is, then we could support something like that. But just to arbitrarily pick a number and say, okay, if you come in with all standard size and no compacts, we're going to give you X percentage of allowance, I don't think we have any basis for doing that, and that may just open us up for other challenges. So,
And there we have consensus.
I guess the bigger question is, for this point, let's talk about this on how we want to present this, and that's what we're doing, how we want to present this to, or make the request to staff then. So we agree that we're going to, for practical purposes, change the wording from long-term to compact. We are not necessarily going to exclude, we're not going to exclude compact from the bag of options that are available, but we need a little further analysis on whether there would be a justification or when there would be a justification for allocations for reductions from parking requirements based on ratio of compact to standard. Is that fair to say?
The efficiency that, the inefficiency, the inefficiency that compacts represent.
And I'm not sure that that's something you can come up with, Ron, but you can take a look at it. I can tell you that based on what I've been looking at the last couple of days, I haven't seen anything that indicates that, other than I have seen a lot of cities going away from compact spaces, other than San Francisco and another one up in the Bay Area. I'm drawing a blank on it, but Charles.
I think kind of what we finally got to on a roundabout way makes sense. Basically, what I would like to see more information on before, obviously, going forward with any full proposal. I mean, we're doing straw votes now. We're not seeing proposals, but I think we do need to see some data, which I'm sure is out there. How hard it is to get, I don't know, but some data on what is, the justification for offering an incentive to move away. In other words, with the credit system that Commissioner Hamilton was talking about, I mean, I think I would only support it if it's based on some sort of hard data that says, we have an incentive on our side, a vested interest that we're trying to meet with our parking standards, to pass that incentive to the developers to say, okay, we're going to have this alternative that, and like you said, 2%, 5%, 10%, whatever that number is, that's where we need the data to say, is there really, at the end of the day, is it all hyperbole, or is there real data to support giving an incentive to move away from the compact space?
Great, thank you. Here's another thought, Ron, because I had another item that I had added in on my own notes here that really kind of falls into this same category, and that is parking credit allocated to parking that would be behind a building or not adjacent to a customer entrance to the building. And this has been something that has been a problem with us for the city and for the Planning Commission on a number of sites. I can think of the site that is at Raymond and El Toro, where they came in there's a auto parts store there and a lot of little places, and they came in and they used the justification of the parking behind the building for how they met their parking requirements, and yet that site is always, it's grossly inadequate, but they've arrived at it because they were able to utilize spaces behind the building. So I would suggest that we, another one would be the one that came before us here just recently, and we've seen over at the Orchard they did some of the same thing. If you go behind the Orchard, it's very lightly parked. You go behind the one at Raymond, almost no parking back there, other than people that are just putting stuff back for the long term. I mean, it's just I think we need to take a look at my own personal opinion. I'm throwing it out here. We can either put it into this or we can add it as another item. When we're looking at parking allocations, and this would fall into the long term, if they want to put long term behind the building, or we only give partial credit for parking that's behind a building, they don't get, if they have 50 spaces back there they think they're counting, and it's clear that they're only going to have 10 employees, they're not going to get credit for 50 parking spaces back there because it effectively is not contributing to the parking requirements for the center. So I think there's, maybe that's another category we want to take a look at that might be slightly independent. Throw that out for, we can roll it into this, or maybe you don't want to consider it at all, but it's a comment. Give me your thoughts.
I'm glad you brought it up because it's an item that we see over and over and over again, and I mean, I'm not sure how we can do this, so I'm going to ask staff. Mal, is there something, how do we walk that line? Because really they shouldn't get one-for-one credit because they can get used back there. As we consider revamping these guidelines, we really need some direction on your side.
Yeah, I mean, that's it's more of a policy question, less of a legal question, and that's it's something that I think staff needs to work through and think through. So on the fly right now, I'm not sure I could give that direction, but I think that staff understands where the commission wants to go, and then we can powwow, brainstorm, and come back with you with what we think might be some solutions to the problem.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and we need to see if there's going to be a consensus on that first. But yeah, I appreciate your input. Lydon, you want to talk?
I'm open to that.
Charles?
I think we found our consensus.
Okay. Okay, I think we've reached consensus on the long-term to compact, and I think we have no problem with changing the wording. I think it sounds like we're going to need to be able to have some more discussion on options on how we can creatively, or how we can allow an applicant to be creative in their parking requirements. At the same time, I think we wouldn't want to have another item to come back to look at parking contributions for spaces that are not easily accessible or adjacent to entrances or something along that line. You get the basic concept, and we can massage it when you come back to us with that. But I think we've kind of beat that one up adequately at this point. That sound okay?
Can I add one more thing? I mean,
sure.
the easiest
Jump in.
thing,
This is the best time to do it.
the easiest thing to do for this compact, I think, would just be to disallow it. But I don't think we should take the easiest route, and that's why I think I kind of like this kind of more flexible freedom route.
Yeah, I think that's what we just ask staff to come back so we get a further discussion on it. Develop something and have further discussion on it. To really be effective on it, I think we were talking about, let's see if there's any information available to us on, and I don't know that there is or there isn't, but if there's some information available to us on the effectiveness of compact spaces. And when we look at that, we'll have to look at the situations that they're applied in also. Clearly some communities, they're going to be more palatable, some they're less. So we need to be able to identify communities that have standards or any kind of performance data that would be somewhat similar to Lake Forest. Does that sound like where we're trying to go? Okay. The next item, the disabled access parking. Anybody like to jump in here?
I'll jump in here.
Okay.
As I asked my question of Ron earlier, this is an automatic from my perspective. This is a default to the state standard. I think if we are just simply at that point, we can never go wrong. We can never have a challenge, and we really don't need to be going back and then revising our own code unnecessarily. So to me, this and the following one are, hey, that's the state standard. It's going to override us anyway. Why don't we just go ahead and adopt it and make it simple? And, you know, if it isn't broken, don't fix it.
Thank you for your comment. Andrew, would you like to jump in here? And Ed?
All right, I'll try not to spend too much time on these two. I guess my question for Mala is, if we adopt a different standard than what the state is, what's the ramifications? Can we do that?
We can't adopt a less stringent standard. It could potentially be more stringent, but we cannot circumvent the state standard.
So can we add is there variance possible? Well, I guess if they
No.
want more, they would not. I was thinking going larger, but they can always add more spots.
We could certainly require more spots than the state code requires, but you cannot deviate from the state code and require less spots.
Okay, so I'm good with adopting the state standard.
Charles, anything to add?
This is the easiest one here. Probably is, there's already a state standard in place, and by mirroring it, we're shielding ourselves from any further issues. I mean, if somebody wants to sue over this particular requirement, they're suing the state, not us. So,
Great, thank you. And I guess the only comment that I would add on this is that, I always hate to see the state try to assume the responsibilities and the powers of the city. We became a city to get out from underneath control that we didn't care for, but in a case like this, unfortunately, no offense to you, Mal, but the attorneys have pretty well set the groundwork for this. So I think the consensus is that comply with the state guidelines as far as our own city's guidelines. Would that be a statement of consensus? Okay. The next would be parking for alternative transportation. Yeah, a little more discussion here, I think, but anybody would like to open this one up? Okay, thank you. A couple comments on this on this one, actually. There was a comment made in here by staff that they wanted some clarification, maybe some ordinance that would prohibit parking on public or private sidewalks. I believe, and Mal, you may know better than I was going to bring my code book in, but I believe that ordinance already exists in the state vehicle code. Vehicles cannot park on either public or private sidewalks. If that doesn't, and I'll pull my code book, and I got so wound up in looking at everybody else's parking ordinances, I didn't get my code book, but I can pull that out and check it, or I can bring my code book up. I'll give it to you, and you can check it if you'd like. But I think that particular item has already been addressed. The thing that Mr. Gardner had a comment on motorcycle spaces, and I think that comment is particularly valid when you're dealing with the compact spaces, because I have had similar situations, I'll leave it at that, where I've got a bike parked and somebody would come and open the door and actually dinged one of the tanks, so you'd think there's plenty of room there. But I think when you get into the full-size spaces, I don't know that same situation typically exists. I think that's where the motorcycle spaces become maybe a little more practical, a little more appropriate. As far as the green agenda, the green building code, there's a clause in here that talks about electric vehicles. I am wondering if we're dealing just strictly with electric, are we going to then run into some conflicts for the P0s and the partially electric, the hybrids and that sort of thing? Are we talking about we're only making provisions for true full electric vehicles, of which there are only a couple available? Or are we talking about making this available to hybrids? Or are we talking about vehicles that fall into the P0? Or, I guess that's where we have to have some further definition in my own mind as to what we're really trying to achieve there, or maybe somebody can give us a definition based on the state's green building code as to what they consider their electric vehicle. Would that be you, Gail? Cheryl?
I think Ron's ready to respond as well. The green code only deals with bicycles at this time, is my understanding. Yeah, they're all in the same discussion, but the bicycle parking is required for certain projects under the green code. Anything else would be over and above that if the Planning Commission wishes to add incentives or credits for parking. And the reason we only discussed electric in here is because those are the only ones that need a charging station. All of the other ones, like compressed natural gas, as we all know, are fueled up at another location. So that's the reasoning behind this sequence of discussion.
Okay, it looked like they were, because it was stated in here for carpool vehicles or electric vehicle charging, so it looked like you were throwing, it looks, I'm not saying you personally, it looks like the intent here was to throw electric vehicles, carpool vehicles, and all those things into a category that gives them some sort of a special parking consideration, not necessarily connected directly to charging. If you're saying charging facilities, that's something different. So maybe we can get a clarification on what is being said here, if you would, please.
Chairman Hughes, with respect to those the parking for carpool or electric vehicles, the idea there is that currently the code has no provisions for that. So if you have an employer who wants to say, I want to reserve 3 spaces on my lot for carpool parking, technically speaking, there's nothing in the code that says you can do that. So the idea there was if the Commission and the Council were so inclined to include a provision that says that you could do that. It's not, the suggestion isn't to require additional parking for those vehicles or to reduce the requirement. It's simply to allow those spaces to be designated, although if the Commission has other thoughts on approaches related to that, then of course we welcome them.
And I guess my concern here was that the way that it's presented, it appears as though we were actually creating some sort of a mandate for special consideration parking for either electric carpool or charging stations. So the intent, the way it's written here, it looks like that's, we're trying to establish some sort of a mandate for it, but what you're saying is that we're just making a provision should the applicant choose to elect to do so. Is that what the intent is here?
Yes, and I should clarify that staff isn't making a recommendation in that regard. We're simply providing options for consideration. So the report shouldn't be interpreted to mean that staff was recommending that provisions be provided in the code for electric vehicles or carpooling. It's simply noting the lack of standards in the current code and putting it out for the Commission. If you like us to amend it to include standards, we can certainly look into that. If you're satisfied with the code the way it is, which has no provisions for it, then then there'd be no changes necessary to the code.
I appreciate it, Ryan. This may be an opportunity to interject what you were talking about as far as if the applicant decides he wants to come in and makes the suggestion of, I'm going to do electric and give me consideration for parking because or whatever my hybrid or B0, whatever it may be.
You're stealing my thunder. Oh. So what I would say
You have a
is...
comment. Go ahead and make it.
Okay. So what I would say is my consensus would be that if it's optional, if we incorporate the green code in the cases when it's optional to an applicant, then I'm all for it, because it allows them the choice and the freedom to choose. But if we adopt the green code and the green code is then amended at some other time to require something, that would be my concern.
So again, Commissioner Hamilton, the green building code at this point simply addresses bicycle parking. provisions for charging stations or other types of parking, that's a separate matter that wouldn't be addressed by reference to the Green Building Code.
Great, thank you, Ron. Like to, more comments? Jerry? Okay, I think it sounds like we've got a consensus on this one. Once again, we are to a certain degree driven by the Green Building Code, so I think we've got a consensus that we need to comply with the Green Building Code. We also want to take a look at some considerations that we could offer. Maybe it would be an incentive for reduced parking requirements based on efficient, compact-sized vehicles. Would that be an appropriate way to put it? Or we're just trying to formulate a consensus here. So.
Are we on the parking for alternative? Alternative? We didn't go back up to long-term, right?
No, we've not gone back up to long-term. We could go there if you really want.
No, I wanted to make
probably
sure.
not a place we want to.
It is my son's
We want to get out of here
Buzzwords
tonight.
tonight,
I say it is my son's 8th birthday. I don't want to go home before he goes to bed.
I'm all for options.
Okay, it sounds like we have a consensus then that we want to make sure that we're in compliance with the Green Building Code, and that we want to take a look at some options that we may be able to formulate for considerations for maybe special considerations when provisions are made for electric charging stations, P0 or better vehicles. Maybe it's a better way to put it rather than to call them all electric, something of that nature. So I guess what we're saying is we want to be able to have an option where we can look at considerations, give the applicant or developer the option to have some different considerations when they're incorporating those features into the project. And those were all of the items that were in the summary table. In the back on page 72 would be the 405. I'd just like to jump in. These are a couple items that are going to be brought before us at some point in the future. I think is that where we were? I just lost it here. But we're going to talk about parking 71 long-term. I'm sorry, oversized vehicle parking, parking lot landscaping, and then one of the items in here that we're going to visit in the future is the single-family, multifamily residence parking and tandem parking. And just when you bring this to us, and it's not something we're doing tonight, but I'd like to suggest that there's some studies out there on the frequency of use and the efficiency, effectiveness of tandem parking. So when we get to the point that we're going to discuss that, that's information that would be important for us to consider. And I've only found one independent study on it at this point, so I'm not going to say anything that's going to prejudice anything, but I just suggest that we probably look at try and get some data on those studies so that we can understand what we're really saying when we commit to tandem parking. Okay. Any further comments on this item? Okay. Seeing none, I guess we are really just going to this item is actually going to stay open, I would assume, and we're going to bring it back at a future date for further consideration. Would that be a fair statement? Everybody in agreement? Okay. All right. Thank you very much. We don't need a motion for that. Is that correct, Mel? Okay. This brings us to the discussion items. And this evening we're going to start with Andrew. Comments items. We're not going to start with you. We're going to start with Mal, and I'll come around and let you be the first commissioner since I always seem to leave you last.
I have nothing.
Thank you, Mel. Gail?
I have no comments this evening.
Okay, thank you. Cheryl, would you like to contribute anything? Okay. Andrew? You're done? That's it? Charles, would you like to contribute anything?
Just a brief thank you to everybody for the earnest and vigorous discussion. I appreciate the fact that we're able to do that. And just to put it on the record, happy birthday to my son, Trey.
Very well done. Jerry?
No comment.
Okay, I have none this evening either, for the sake of trying to get out of here a little bit quicker for your son's birthday. Wish him a happy birthday for all of us. I would like to thank everybody in the audience for coming this evening. We do appreciate your input and your comments. Please bring more of you back next time.
If I may, before you drop the gavel, I'm sorry. I also just want to make a point of thanking Mr. Gardner for his input and his energy level. I don't always agree with you, but I always appreciate what you do for us.
You know, can I add one more, too? I think, I'm not sure how to say it, but maybe we should look at doing something traffic-oriented that pleases the other commissioners. I don't know if that's within our purview. Would never want to step on the toes of the other people sitting up here, the city council, so if it's something that...
Yeah, I think we would have to make a request, ask staff to make a request to the city council if we wanted to give some sort of consideration to traffic. One of the things we can do, just a comment, and Mal, if I'm out of line here, let me know. This may not be the appropriate place for it, but one of the things we can do is when an applicant comes before us, we can ask for additional information, clarifications, support for traffic considerations. If somebody tells us that they've got a certain anticipated traffic flow, we can ask for clarification on how that's going to impact the surrounding areas, which is precisely what we did in a project. I think it was actually at your first or second meeting where we asked the applicant to come back with further analysis on level of service for a number of intersections based on different scenarios. So we do have the ability to ask that of the applicant. And I think that's where we'll see things change, is when we see projects brought before us. We need to be able to understand how those projects are going to impact us. I don't know if that answered your question, but yeah, I would agree. Traffic is always a major consideration, I think, for all of us here. We've struggled with that. So, Gail, is there a vehicle that we can? It's kind of. I think we need to be a little more specific. I don't know that we can just talk about traffic in general. That's a project that's pretty overwhelming. If we had certain regions maybe or something. I mean, I don't want to, I'm concerned that we're going to put a request on you that we may not see any data coming back for in a year or two. I mean, that wouldn't serve us.
I think the answer here, you were correct in the beginning. Staff would forward, if the Commission had some consensus, staff could forward a request to the City Council. It's really their call. It may help you. We could bring back some additional information. We do have thresholds that we use for when projects require traffic studies. So, and the scope of the traffic study and the number of intersections. There's you know, a science to traffic studies, and perhaps we could have our traffic engineer come and talk to you in general about traffic studies and how it's determined what intersections to study, things like that. But the broader question or the concept that we heard was some kind of a traffic commission or something else, which is different than looking at traffic studies that are required for projects that meet a certain threshold. If that's what you would, if that's the nature of the request, that would certainly be something we'd forward up to the City Council.
So, yeah, I mean, I would be willing to, as my 1 of 5 votes, if the City Council were to, if we were to ask the City Council, or if the City Council were to direct us to do some kind of planning, traffic commission responsibility, you know, if that's...
How about this? As a starting point, and I don't know that we necessarily need to go to City Council for this, but maybe we can get an agenda item, Gail, to have a, because we do have a couple of new commissioners on here, maybe we can have an opportunity to have a presentation from our traffic engineer and talking about how traffic studies are developed, how they relate to how they're specific to projects, intersection levels of service, kind of that sort of thing?
Sure, we could do that. That would be a good informational item. We can also cover the city's traffic model and some of the tools that we have built and constructed over the years that the commission may not be familiar with, but we could certainly, we've got some very full agendas coming up, but we could look for an opportunity to do a presentation on the city's traffic standards.
If we have a consensus, we can do that as a starting point, maybe.
I'm always open to learning more.
Yeah, I think there's, I think Andrew has a good point about understanding traffic and looking at, I haven't given any thought to having a traffic commission. I'm not sure that we're at a juncture at the development of this community that a traffic commission would necessarily pay us any dividends. We're getting close to being built out at this point. But certainly there's an opportunity for us to all have a better understanding of traffic and how it impacts our community, how we determine what those impacts may be, I guess is maybe a better way of putting it. And then we can take it from there and develop it into something else that doesn't get us where we need to be. We can develop it into another request to the City Council. And could we do that in fairly short order so that if we decide as a commission that we want to make a request to City Council, that we could move ahead before we see too much time go by?
As I mentioned, at least for the next 3 Planning Commission meetings, we have very, very full agendas. If you want, we could perhaps prepare some written material that we could send to the Commission, but as far as, I mean, we have 7, 8 items on some of the agendas coming up. So if you can wait for 3 meetings or so, Cheryl?
Probably a presentation would be more effective for us, do you think? Everybody?
Presentation would be good.
Yeah, I guess the answer is then we're going to wait for 3 or 4 meetings and
Right.
if we can get
So
the
probably in
presentation.
July. We can shoot for that time frame.
There were a few, Charles.
Works for me.
Andrew?
There's always room to improve.
And we certainly hope to get there. Any further comments? Okay. Well, I think we've beat it up pretty well here tonight, so we're going to adjourn to the next regularly scheduled Planning Commission meeting. Thank you.